All right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It's Dr. E. Today's date is November 3rd, 2022. And if you listen to the sound of my voice, you were blessed to see another day. And for that, all praise, honor, and glory is due to the Most High God of Israel, for now and forever. All right, shalom, everyone. Welcome to all my new subscribers. And if you're new to the channel, or even if you've been here for a while, make sure you hit that subscribe button and select all, so you'll be notified every time I upload a new presentation. All right, I want to thank everybody for their continued support, liking the videos and commenting, because I tell you it's an uphill struggle, but we're going to keep it moving by grace and mercy of the Most High. All right, I said I was going to do these kind of Black history segments because I want to kind of give light to stories that virtually have never been told, you know, because there's a lot of our stories throughout history that hasn't been told. I mean, I'm learning stuff like pretty much every day, man. It's boggling my mind, and I consider myself, you know, like a well-read brother, you know, and knowledgeable, especially about, you know, Black history. But in keeping with that, this story about this brother right here, man, I had no idea, but I've never heard the story in my life. This brother's in the 70s now, and back in the I think it was early 70s, he and a couple other people basically hijacked a plane and made them take them to Algiers. Right. And so anyway, he ended up and he's in France now today. And, you know, he hasn't touched foot on the U.S. soil since. And I was just like, wow, I was just really intrigued with that story. So, yeah, I'm without further ado, let me go ahead and get into that. I hope you guys enjoy this presentation. Like I said, all the videos that you feel led to share, please do so, because all that helps with the, you know, with the algorithm and all that. So appreciate all of you. Until next time, this is Dr. E signing off, saying shalom, elect. All right, here we go. And credit for this article goes to Miss Kim Helmegard. And let's see here. All right, it says in 1972, Melvin McNair helped hijack a plane to join the Panthers in Algeria. And he says, quote, "I am at peace with what I did." Wow, this story, I was just like fascinated when I saw this. I never heard about this story in my life, like ever. All right, the story goes on to say that in exile in France, McNair has built a life around community service and baseball. He is wanted by the authorities in the United States for his 50-year-old crime. All right, he says, the hijackers played music, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, and the Four Tops, thinking it would keep the 86 passengers of Delta Airlines Flight 841 calm. Most never knew that one of the hijackers had held a weapon to a flight attendant's head, or that they threatened to harm passengers one by one unless their ransom demand was met, or that if things spiraled out of control, the plane might end up out of fuel over the Atlantic Ocean and everyone would drown. That's a scary thought. Wow. He said, quote, "We just didn't want anyone to panic or get hurt," end quote, says Melvin McNair. Next year marks 50 years since McNair, 72, hijacked a plane with his wife and 3 other Black Americans. On July 31st, 1972, they forced the Delta airliner bound for Miami from Detroit to divert to Algeria after demanding $1 million from the U.S. government. They wanted to connect with Eldridge Cleaver, and other members of the Black Panther Party, the revolutionary-minded, controversial political organization that had established an international chapter in Algeria's capital, Algiers. The United States, the hijackers concluded, was not always what it said it was, or what it wanted to be. McNair and his associates saw the hijacking as a surefire way to escape racial violence, police brutality, and government repression. But they found that the Black Panthers and life on the run was not what they wanted it to be either. After less than 2 years in Algeria, they moved to France, where in 1976 they were arrested, imprisoned, and exiled. They ended up on the FBI's fugitive list. If McNair steps back onto U.S. soil, he faces arrest. Reminds me of who who's that? Tupac's aunt, Asada Shakur. She's been in exile in Cuba. Something I might do something on her. Asada Shakur. I might do something on her. McNair's radical decision cost him his life in the United States. For the first time, he is telling his story to a U.S. media outlet. And he says, quote, "Maybe it was a miscalculation," McNair says. The small city in Normandy, France, that has been his home for nearly half a century, but I'm at peace with what I did. McNair was 24 when he helped hijack Delta Airlines Flight 841. He never formally joined the Black Panthers. He was neither black nationalist nor separatist. The racism he encountered as a black man growing up in 1950s Greensboro, North Carolina, and later in the United States military was similar to that faced by others from his generation, including segregation, slurs, and limited opportunities. There is no single moment, as McNair tells it, that prompted his act of desperation. Quote, "But I can't deny our backs were against the wall. We felt we were facing death," he says. "We had to make a decision," end quote. After nearly 4 years of prison in France for air piracy, McNair disappeared with his family into French society. He became a government social worker and a mentor to troubled French youth in Caen. Baseball was the medium McNair used to impart his life lessons. Make the most of opportunities thrown your way. Stay positive in the face of adversity. Lessons McNair feels he himself failed to heed as a young man. Quote, "Baseball is like a liberation in itself," McNair says. "You need logic and strategy and technique. There are many options. You need to pick the right ones. You need to do it quickly, and you need to be the master of yourself." Sound like a 5%er, end quote. Hold on. And he goes on. It's in Caen, McNair became Mr. Baseball. He draws effusive praise from former colleagues, parents of young children and teens he has coached and mentored, and just about everyone he encounters, from the area optometrist to a group of landscapers pulling weeds from an underpass. He has played in various French semi-professional leagues and volunteered as a trainer with French national and Olympic young teams. But on occasion, he longs for the smell of honeysuckle or to see the peach trees of his native North Carolina, especially when he talks with his sister or cousins by phone, which isn't often. Quote, "Sometimes when I look back on it now, I think if at some moment in my life I had taken another direction, then maybe things would have worked out differently," he says. McNair spends most of his time in a Caen neighborhood called La Grâce de Dieu, which in English translates as the grace of God. La Grâce de Dieu state-built rectangular apartment blocks are neat, if a little drab. White avenues accommodate space for bike paths and a modern-looking tram system. A central square hosts a dozen small shops and a community center. Though McNair retired from social work in 2014, he maintains a busy schedule of meetings with local officials who seek his advice on a broad array of community issues. He regularly checks in on former pupils. In 2013, the city named a baseball field after him and his late wife, Jean McNair, in recognition of their work with disadvantaged kids. Terrain D Baseball, Melvin at Jean McNair is little more than a stripped-down diamond on the edge of a large multi-purpose field, but it signifies McNair's influence. Quote, "Melvin was like a dad for people like me," says Mohammed Baladi, 52, a former student. McNair says the hijacking was the result of an accumulation of experiences with racism that began in earnest for him after he left Greensboro to join the U.S. Army. Despite growing up in a city intimately connected to the civil rights movement, notably through the 1960 Woolworth lunch counter sit-in, McNair did not feel compelled to participate in protest. Quote, "You'd get hostile insults, stuff like that. However, I was never in a position where I felt physically threatened or abused or something like that," McNair says. McNair was born in 1948, 3 years after my mom. His father left the family when McNair was 4. His mother worked long hours in a tobacco factory and later as a domestic servant for a wealthy white family. A favorite uncle, one of Greenboro's first black police officers, took responsibility for raising him. Quote, I was brought up to defend myself and was planning on being a professional baseball player. I kept getting told that Superman was white. I wasn't so sure, McNair recalls. In 1966, the same year, Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale founded the Black Panther Party in Oakland, California. A baseball scholarship took McNair to Winston-Salem State University, a historically black public college. He soon met Jean Carroll Allen, a bookish and reserved woman from Winston-Salem with a strong social conscience. Quote, she was the brains, I was the brawn, he says. Before I met Jean, I was little more than a jock, end quote. The young couple started attending the growing number of civil rights marches, protests, and demonstrations in and around Winston-Salem. But McNair found living on campus alienating. He was frustrated by what seemed like pointless and contradictory rules and demands, such as curfews mandated by the terms of his scholarship from the college's coaches and athletic staff. Quote, it was like they were trying to break my spirit, end quote, McNair says. Before long, McNair lost his scholarship because of various discipline-related transgressions. He had a bad attitude and talked back to the coaching staff. Oh boy, it's a black thing you wouldn't understand, right? He was kicked out of campus housing and eventually he decided to leave college altogether. He was then drafted into the United States Army. At Fort Bragg, I lived there too in Fayetteville. It's a cool little area. McNair was singled out for his intelligence and leadership qualities. Yet, time and again, McNair was passed over for promotion. Oh my God. In favor of white soldiers who he says had done little to prove themselves. The Army identified McNair as a top athlete. When his battalion handed out a sports award, that too went to a white man. Quote, I liked the discipline of the Army. The racism cut my ambitions short, though, McNair says. McNair decided to become an Army clerk, an office logistics job that would mostly keep him away from the front line. In 1969, shortly after passing his clerk qualification at a military school in Virginia, he became one of the 25,000 black American troops stationed in West Germany. Army life in Germany soured quickly for McNair, even though Jean McNair, now his wife and pregnant, had joined him in the Berlin after getting her degree. One time during a basketball game he was playing in, the wife of a white soldier shouted from the stands in McNair's direction, "Get the N-word off the court." McNair turned to his lieutenant, who was also his coach. "You hear this stuff?" The coach said. There was nothing he could do about it. McNair began resisting the Army in small ways. He let his afro grow. He refused to stand for the national anthem. Wow, he was pulling a Colin Kaepernick way back then, huh? So instead of saluting, McNair raised a fist. Carlos and Tommy Smith from the 1968 Olympics. I don't know if any of you remember that. That was infamous. Now famous. But McNair would raise a fist instead of saluting, the gesture used by the Black Panthers to signal the civil rights struggle, black empowerment, and moral conviction. And let's be real, man, this country always had a problem with black people feeling empowered or having any type of pride. Let's be real, man. Anyway, moving on. Soon, word came that McNair was being sent to Vietnam. McNair was concerned he would be asked to take on a combat role. At first, McNair sought a legal exit from the Army on the grounds of racism. He enlisted the help of an aunt who worked at the Pentagon and American Civil Liberties Union's lawyers. When that failed, he decided to desert. You don't want to desert. That's like going UA times 10. That means basically they looking at you like you derelicting your duty. You just leaving your duty. You just trying to basically run away or whatever. That's desertion. Like, and no plans to come back. They don't expect you to come back. That's what desertion means. He told his army bosses that before deploying to Vietnam, he needed extra money to get Gene and the baby settled back to the United States. That bought time and a financial cushion. The McNairs settled on Detroit because Gene had a friend from college who lived there. The city also had a large black population, always have, along with a strong base of black nationalists who advocated for economic self-sufficiency and racial pride. Gene McNair got a job teaching. McNair trained to be manager of an Italian fast food restaurant named Gino's. Meanwhile, they were drawn to the Black Panthers' charitable work. In the early 1970s, the group was running health clinics nationwide and feeding thousands of American children every day before they went to school. Still, the McNairs decided against making contact with the Detroit chapter because they knew the FBI was closely watching anyone affiliated with it. Since the 1950s, the FBI's COINTELPRO, which stood for Counterintelligence Program Unit, had been surveilling, infiltrating, and harming political groups, activists, and anyone it deemed subversive in what is now regarded as the darkest period in FBI history. Yeah. Black Panthers bore the brunt of COINTELPRO operations. Yes, they did. In late 1969, for example, Fred Hampton, a young rising star of the party, had been killed in an FBI orchestrated police raid as he slept in his Chicago apartment, more like assassinated. In May 1971, 21 members of the Black Panther Party, including 2 who fled to Algeria, were acquitted of a conspiracy to bomb department stores, police stations, railroads, and a large botanical garden in New York City. During the trial, it was revealed FBI infiltrators organized the plot. Wow. Quote, "We knew we had to get out of the USA because we knew American police and the FBI were terrorizing black people like us," McNair says. McNair is reluctant to go into much detail about how the hijacking plot was hatched. What's clear is that it was formed in the immediate wake of the shooting in Detroit of a friend of McNair's named George Brown. Brown was shot by police as he walked home one evening from a movie. Detroit police said he had a knife and shot him during an assault. Brown's French widow, Annie Brown, says her husband was shot 6 times with dum-dum bullets designed to expand on impact. I think we call those hollow points. And nearly died. A court accepted Brown's claim. He was ambushed by police and threw out the charges. McNair had been introduced to Brown by another friend, George Wright, whom McNair met while they both worked at Gino's. Not long after they met, all 5 adults plus 3 children moved into a house near the Detroit River. Okay, let's see here. I'm trying to... The hijackers spent weeks doing research. First, identified a plane, a DC-8. They were confident it could be flown nonstop to Algeria. They established the plane was completely inaccessible from underneath. They did not want the FBI to storm the aircraft via the luggage hold. William H. May, the pilot of Delta Airlines Flight 841, says he was in the bathroom when the hijacking began. The plane was about an hour from landing. Wright was disguised as a priest. He hid his weapon in a hollowed-out Gideon Bible. Brown impersonated a disheveled college student. McNair pretended to be a businessman. Wow, the boy was getting it in. Wow, that sounds kind of a little elaborate. They had to plan this out, huh? The McNairs and Tillerson had brought their children along. Johari and Ayana were 2 and 1, respectively. Kenya, Tillerson's child, was 3. Gene McNair and Tillerson entertained the kids with coloring books and games. The Black Panthers and the hijackers met in Algeria. It says, especially Cleaver, the party's charismatic though troubled spokesman, were a disappointment. Quote, "The only thing that interested Cleaver was the money," Brown says in a 2011 documentary, Nobody Knows My Name. Brown goes on, "They weren't dealing with the struggle. They were women hunting in Algeria. We risked our lives for believing in the cause, and when we got there, the cause wasn't there," end quote. Wow. They say never meet your heroes, man. Real talk. That's what they say. McNair was more hesitant to directly criticize Cleaver or other Black Panthers in Algeria because he says that everybody was naive and young around there, were all types of manipulations, disinformation, and stuff like that going on from the FBI and elsewhere, end quote. In all, the hijackers lasted about 18 months in North Africa. They lived comfortably in government housing, but without a car, it was difficult to get around. They didn't speak French. They met few Algerians. They were warned by the Algerian Secret Service to be on the lookout for U.S. spies who might try to harm them. Quote, "We had to learn how to be in a hostile environment," McNair says. They also had another big decision to make. Quote, "We knew we had to leave Algeria," McNair said. "We also knew we couldn't move with the kids." Tillerson's uncle flew to Algeria to take Johari, Ayana, and Kenya back to the United States. In 1974, all 5 hijackers left Algeria for France on forged passports. Wow. They calculated that France's relatively large Black community would afford them a degree of anonymity not possible elsewhere in Europe. Strong links between Algeria and France had also brought the hijackers to the attention of activists and human rights organizations in France willing to help shelter them. In Paris, McNair found work in a printing shop. By 1976, all the hijackers except for Wright were in a French jail. They were arrested in a coordinated police operation after pressure from the U.S. government. After he was apprehended in 1976 in the printing shop, McNair served just under 4 years in jail. He was let out early for good behavior, which included learning French. Brown served a similar amount of time. Jean and Tillerson were freed right after the trial, which took almost 2 years to come before the court so they could be reunited with their children. Wright separated from the group after they arrived in France and refused to tell the others where he was going. In 2011, Wright was discovered living near Lisbon in a beach town. After spending time in Guinea-Bissau on West Africa's Atlantic coast, Wright had built a secret life for himself as a family man in Portugal under the name Jorge dos Santos. The United States tried to extradite Wright from Portugal to finish the murder sentence he was serving when he escaped from prison in 1970 and to face charges for the hijacking. Portugal ruled he could not be extradited because Wright had become a Portuguese national. Officials there also seemed satisfied he was rehabilitated. The French government has long refused to extradite McNair because it did not believe he would get a fair trial. His supporters point out that no one was physically hurt during the hijacking. The ransom money was returned after he served his sentence. McNair devoted his life to helping others. But Susan Murphy, who was 12 when she was on Delta Flight 841 with her parents, remains unsatisfied. She says she understands McNair's motivations for hijacking the plane, but passengers like her deserve an apology. Quote, "We will live with the trauma until the day we are gone from this earth. McNair did good works and had many people look up to him. I am one who does not," she says. Although air piracy is a serious crime and the hijackers threatened to do harm, USA Today found no evidence either in published news reports, passenger testimony, or interviews with May FBI agent William Brown and others that anyone believes McNair should continue to pay for what he did. And they said, quote, "There's no question in my mind Melvin has paid his debt to society," says David Mann, director of Fort Wayne, Indiana-based World Partners, a faith-based group involved with humanitarian work. Mann has staged a series of baseball clinics with McNair in Cayenne. And let me go ahead and finish this up, man. Highlights. He says, "Sometimes I think it was simply the arrogance of my youth." He says he wouldn't do it again. He is concerned his life's work in France will be obscured by his associations with Wright, who has more serious charges to face. McNair says he has a lot of love and respect for Wright, but it was also a shock to learn of that conviction he got. McNair worries too that were he to return to the United States, he either may not recognize the country he left behind or would struggle to find a role for himself in social justice movements now dominated, he suspects, by brighter, younger, more nimble activists. "I found a way to be constructive and productive in Cayenne," he says, and his links to the area have deepened. Gene McNair, hold on. The city plans to name a street after Gene McNair in honor of her work. She is lauded in Cayenne, as is her husband, for her tireless work with after-school programs, a concept she helped pioneer in France. Gene McNair is buried in Cayenne. So is McNair's eldest son, Johari, who in 1998 was shot dead on a street in Winston-Salem, targeted by a local gang in a revenge killing. There are grandkids to consider. 3 from Ayana, 2 more from other son, Toumani, who was born in France, and 3 of whom died recently. What? From Johari. McNair is not able to see Johari's children often because they live in the United States. One thing McNair has learned: be careful whom you trust. In fact, McNair's best baseball pitch, like the arc of his life, is a slow curveball. Almost 50 years after the hijacking a plane from Detroit to Algeria, Melvin McNair is still coming to terms with the lifelong consequences of his actions. It says, watch this 2012 documentary directed by Maya Welsher, produced by Maya Welsher and Matthew Bagiti, and edited by Sophie Bronet. And the name of the documentary is called Melvin and Gene, An American Story. All right. It kind of threw me off. The story was so lengthy. I wasn't really expecting that, but I pretty much gave you the highlights, man. I never heard of this story. So I learned that, pretty much around the same time as you guys are. I never heard about this in my life, never read about it, knew nothing about this. But I hope y'all enjoyed it. Definitely check out that documentary. Until the next time, let's talk to E signing off, saying Shalom, elect.